Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, March 31st, 2022, and today we're going to be taking a look at the states of Texas and Florida. And we are doing this in conjunction with this article that was released in the Larry Sabato Crystal Ball from the University of Virginia, talking about the fastest growing counties, more specifically focusing on these major parts of the nation that are ultimately shifting left and right despite the populations seeming to grow between year after year. If you take a look at the fastest growing counties, you will find that, first of all, the parameters is that it has at least 100,000 residents, and you don't find them in every single state. Obviously, every single state, or at least most of them, should have a county that has 100,000 residents or more, and what you will find is that not every state is on here. But there is two states in specific that have some pretty substantial chunks out of this entire chart here. And it isn't California, it isn't New York, but instead it is the states of Texas and Florida. Now, Florida and Texas have been gaining in terms of popularity for homeowners and people that are moving in and out of the country. Texas and Florida serve as these Sunbelt hotspots that people seem to be attracted to in terms of overall land ownership and wanting to contribute to a state environment, whatever that might be. And seeing these population shifts, you find that some of these major counties ultimately result in political shifts as well. You have voters that are moving into different parts of Florida that consequently result in Democrats improving. You have other people moving into, Texas or other parts of Florida that show Republicans improving. But in today's video, we are focusing primarily on Florida and Texas and talking about some of the changes that we see in terms of it relative to the last presidential election margin. Taking a look at Florida and Texas, you actually find some pretty substantial differences. Now, Florida and Texas are states that generally vote differently, or at least in terms of overall margin. Sometimes it's both red, but occasionally it goes one blue, one red, and almost always the blue is coming from the state of Florida. But more recently, Florida has gotten a lot closer to being a similar margin to Texas. Florida was decided by 3.3% in the 2020 presidential election, whereas Texas was decided by 5.6%. That 2.3% margin seems like, that's super close. And it is. It is exceptionally close, especially considering that 8 years prior to the 2020 election, what we found was that the state of Texas voted about 16 points to the right of the state of Florida. In 2020, it was about 2 points to the right. The state of Florida and Texas are at a converging point. They will inevitably cross paths, at least based off what we are seeing today. And these numbers based off of these fastest growing counties sort of reaffirm that. Taking a look at the state of Florida, what you find is that, keep in mind, we are going by April 2020 population, July 21 population. You see an increased percentage here. Then you move on to Republican presidential margin in 2012, Republican presidential margin in 2020, and then the change in Republican margin. And take a look at the state of Florida. In almost every single county that is growing in population, almost every single one, that growth has actually contributed, or at least in part contributed, in addition to regional and cultural shifts across these counties, to Republicans doing better than they did in 2012. Now, it isn't the fairest comparison, because 2012 was a year in which Republicans lost the presidential election by a larger margin than they lost in 2020. However, I will say that Texas will show you some quite surprising numbers if you keep that in mind as well. So ultimately, I think it is a fair assumption. You have, 2016, which was a Republican victory, so 2012 is definitely the last one to take a look at. So that's, what we can overall see. But in the state of Florida, what you are looking at is that there are not necessarily these gigantic changes in population, but keep in mind this is over just 1 year. You go from a minimum of 3% up to 7%. And in almost every single one of these counties, you are seeing Republicans increase the vote by 3, by 22, sometimes down by 6 and down by 11, but those are the two outliers. All the remaining 12 out of the 14 counties here show Republicans advancing in vote share. And that can explain why in the state of Florida, you find that based off of the shifts from 2016, there are a number of counties that shifted to the right, and many of them, like Miami-Dade County, were very large counties. Take a look at the Miami-Dade County margin. Joe Biden wins with 617,000 votes. Donald Trump receives 532,000. That seems like a good amount for Joe Biden. But in 2016, Hillary Clinton got 633,000 votes. Isn't that weird? A difference here in which Hillary Clinton was getting more votes than Joe Biden. You might be thinking, okay, well, did Trump win Miami-Dade County in 2016? No. Donald Trump received 333,000 votes in Miami-Dade County, which means that with the increased turnout in Florida, voters shifted from Clinton to Trump. That's exactly what happened. Clinton to Trump. And that's a shift that we had seen in many of these populous counties. Also, Obama to Trump, huge thing in the state of Florida. You're finding that, especially considering that Trump won Florida in 2020 and Obama won it in 2012. But I will say that Texas shows quite a surprising result that is completely opposite to what we see in Florida. The state of Texas, in every single one of these counties that is growing in population, has shifted further away from the GOP, sometimes by 27 percentage points. These shifts are monumental, and they cannot be ignored. There's a reason why Texas has consistently gotten closer. While Texas does have many counties that shifted towards the right, and by exceptionally large margins, Texas overall as a state shifted 4 points to the left in 2020. And it looks like it could continue to shift further and further to the left. We should have seen this happening and seen this coming from 2018, when Texas was decided by a margin of 2.6 and Florida was decided by 0.2. The difference here being 2.4% is nearly identical to the difference that we saw in the 2020 presidential election of 2.3%. Keep that in mind. Florida and Texas, between the two, were very close, even though Florida is routinely much more competitive. Texas ended up close, nearly just as close. And it looks like for 2020 and 2024 and potentially future elections, it looks as if the state of Texas could actually cross over and become a more Democratic state, or at least more left-leaning than the state of Florida. It's a reality that I don't think many of us expected to see. It's a reality that Republicans, I think, don't really want to happen. But the change is very noticeable. Between 2016 and 2020, Texas got bluer and Florida got redder. But you might be thinking, okay, it was a Clinton loss, then a Biden victory. Let's move back to 2012. Both Democratic victories, what do you find? Let's take a look. Texas, 10 points to the left. Relative to 2020, 10 points more left wing than 2012. Florida, 4 points more right wing. They're moving in opposite directions. 2008, Florida, 6 points more Republican. Texas, 6 points more Democrat. You take a look at these margins, you see them, right? You see the difference and the opposite direction that they are moving in. And as we move into 2024, what we might find is that Texas could shift again another 3.4%, or potentially between 2016 and 2012, shift by 6.8%. What we will find is that Texas could be in a position where it ends up about even. Democrats and Republicans are in a mutually competitive position. Republicans have the upper hand, but Florida votes to the right of the state of Texas. And that's when the priorities of the Democratic Party will likely change forever. We are getting an early warning sign that the Sun Belt is growing, and that the Sun Belt might be telling us, based off of these growing numbers and changes in votes, especially considering that you're seeing sometimes a 9% shift every single year in terms of growth in population. What you are going to find that the state of Texas and the state of Florida are ultimately going to be different from each other. Even though right now they might both be voting red, I want you to keep that in mind. We are seeing the early signs now, and I don't think we should be shocked if in 2028, Florida goes red and Texas goes blue, because that could very much be in our reality and in our future, looking at these numbers now. And I'm quite frankly not super surprised. Texas is growing in population, but not growing in the way that the Republican Party would like, whereas Florida is. Florida is growing in terms of a Hispanic population that is much more willing to vote for Republicans than they are in Texas. You take a look at Cuban voters in the state of Florida. They are also much more willing to vote for Republicans than other voters in the state of Texas. What you're finding is that Florida just has the right culture, the right demographic breakdown, and the right amount of influx in terms of right-leaning people who move to the state of Florida. I don't think there's a term for, interstate immigration. But what you are finding essentially is that Florida is growing in its Republican population, whereas Texas isn't. Florida now has more registered Republicans than Democrats in the state for the first time in a very long time. In addition to that, what you're looking at is more. In addition to what you're looking at in the state of Texas is somewhat of an opposite type of situation where voters are moving to Texas, but they're actually turning the state bluer. You're looking at population growths in the Austin, Texas area, in Dallas, in Houston, and you're looking at it in the suburbs. You're looking at the traditional suburban mom type of stereotype that Republicans used to crack down on and win routinely, as we saw in 2000, in 2004, in 2008, and 2012, but lost it when Trump went on that ballot, and lost it for good after 2020. They could walk it back with someone like Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis, but it will never be as strong as it was under Romney or even Bush, who won Texas by 23 points. Texas is getting bluer. Florida doesn't look like it's getting that much bluer. Democrats have not won a statewide election since Obama won his second term, at least a notable statewide election. And what I mean by that is senator, governor, any type of major position. The only elected statewide Democrat is the agricultural commissioner. That is the only Democrat that has been elected statewide, and that was elected back in 2018. Even in 2018, Democrats struggled at winning in the state of Florida. It was a completely winnable race, and Ron DeSantis won by 0.4. The Senate race, same exact thing, a completely winnable race, but Democrats ultimately fumbled, and Florida went to the Republicans by 0.1. Even in this blue wave year. Nobody thought Texas was going to go blue on the Senate level or the governor level. It just didn't seem like it was possible, especially considering that Donald Trump had won it by 9 points in 2016. But it almost happened. Whereas Florida, despite being a state that Trump only won by 1 percentage point, still couldn't relinquish its Republican identity, and then doubled down on it by doubling the margin of victory for Trump in the 2020 presidential election. All around, what I think, what I'm gathering from this and what I think that we should be considering and understanding for our future elections is that what we know about American politics and about swing states is likely going to change. The Democratic Party, I have no doubt, is going to heavily focus on the state of Texas. I think they are also going to be less worried about the state of Florida. They might intervene in countries such as Venezuela, where we have seen President Biden put down his foot, whereas other presidents have not, to avoid backlash from potentially voters in Florida that might be dissuaded by such a move or turned off in terms of voting for the Democratic Party. Florida is not a state that I would say the Democratic Party has a very good shot at winning in most election years. Even in blue waves, Democrats don't seem to be lucky. There hasn't even been a Democratic governor of the state of Florida since Bill Clinton was president, since 1994. Keep that in mind. 1994 was the last time a Democrat won in the state of Florida on the governor level. They have had Republican after Republican after Republican after Republican, and they don't seem to want to change. No matter how close it gets, it isn't showing us a leftward trend. And the population growth seems to be happening in counties that are experiencing significant rightward trends. Is this population growth going to counteract it? Maybe not. This population growth was happening and contributed to this trend. There are 2 outliers, St. John's and Santa Rosa, but beyond that, you don't really see much else. In the state of Texas, what you find is every single county shifts towards the left. Every single one. Some very major ones. Fort Bend, with nearly 1 million people, 17 points more Democratic. Collin County, 27% more Democratic with 1 million residents and voters. You're looking at many of these counties with 500,000 constituents, hundreds of thousands of constituents, and Democrats are improving by 11, 11, 15, 21, 1, 22, 13, 3, 17, 17, 27, 3, 24, right? There actually was one exception. I missed this. Hunt County actually improved for the GOP, but 1.4%. Nothing super substantial. That's an outlier, though. It's the same way that there are 2 outliers in the state of Florida. The main takeaway is that Texas and Florida are moving in drastically different directions. So keep that in mind as we go ahead and take a look at our future presidential election maps, our future presidential election expectations. All around, these 2 states are not ones that are going to be easy to predict, but I think one thing seems to be very evident, that Texas is getting bluer, whereas Florida doesn't seem to be moving in that direction whatsoever. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.